Very important topics, so we can move on to some other things.
Oh, this seems important for a New Hampshire winter. Yeah.
It does.
I guess we don't. We can't do this.
Oh, he just looked at me.
Are we on? We're on.
Thank you.
Looking for my mic, it's down here. Good evening, welcome to the Hanover Selectboard meeting of February 6, 2013. We're here tonight to have some fun and do good work for the town. Is there anyone here for public comment? If not, the first order of business is I hereby set down a public hearing to potentially accept unanticipated funds from the State of New Hampshire in the amount of $140,000, $244.37, representing an increase in the rooms and meals revenue.
This is your opening of public hearing, right?
I have just opened the public
Okay,
hearing
yeah, thank
to
you.
accept
I
these
misunderstood.
unanticipated funds. We set the public hearing at the last meeting down for tonight. Correct.
I have a question.
Is there a second to that?
I second your motion.
Okay.
Um,
Well, I opened the hearing. Now, my motion is to accept the undesignated funds of $140,244.37. Is there a second to that?
I'll second that one too.
All right.
I'll second everything.
Good job.
What is unanticipated? We're getting so many of these days, and we've had, we get them all the time. Well, not all the time. We have had like 4 last time, 3 this time. I forgot what unanticipated means. I know.
So basically, once the budget is voted on at town meeting, any kind of change to the budget after that has to be ratified through this process. So any revenue that wasn't anticipated when town meeting voted on the budget, so grants especially, but also sometimes state fees will come in higher than what we predicted. And if that's the case, we just have to have a hearing to accept the unanticipated revenue because it modifies the budget.
This is a relatively new procedure because we've been educated that we needed to do this.
Oh. Okay.
We also haven't had rooms and meals revenue
That is.
coming from the state recently, as far as I can remember.
Say again,
We haven't had any rooms and meals tax, unanticipated rooms and meals tax coming in from the state in many
This
years.
is a one-time event.
Yes.
And, they make up the rules about rooms and meals tax, and who gets them and who doesn't get them and how much it is. And so in this time, I guess the ball bounced towards us rather than away from us. So
I'll take it.
is that it?
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah, and there's a memo in the packet from NHMA about this and the New Hampshire retirement system money that came back too. So if people want a little more information, there's something there.
Okay, so we should say thank you.
I think so. Yeah, I'll say thank you.
I don't know if we should say thank you.
Don't just say yes.
Well, thank you to the visitors to our towns, to our state,
To
who
our
pay
state.
rooms and meals tax,
That's
as
correct.
well as those of us who go to restaurants.
Okay. So
Is my memory incorrect in saying that the state has not been sharing the rooms and meals tax the way they say they
Yeah,
that's
supposed
correct.
to? So I don't really want to say thank you then.
okay, so I withdraw my thank you, except to the people who come here and pay
Yes.
pay those taxes.
and our citizens.
Absolutely.
Any other discussion?
Public,
Any public? This is a public hearing. Any public input? Hearing none. Board. Hearing
All in
none.
favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's accepted, and we now close the public hearing. I do have a question. So what happens with this money now? It goes back to the town. It becomes a part of our, to a certain extent, it creates hopefully added to the surplus from last year, and it goes into undesignated fund balance. Is that the process?
That is my general understanding. I don't know if we know a more specific workflow yet at this point. Oh, I see. Right, Pete's gonna. Where's the money?
Did the fire department have anything to say about this?
No.
That's why there's so many folks here tonight because they all saw. Yeah, they knew the rate.
140K.
Undesignated.
Okay, so it just goes back into the general
undesignated,
coffer and is available to the town to use at some future time.
Yes,
That's our understanding of the
that's the
moment.
basic premise.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that public hearing is closed.
Yes.
And here comes a couple more at you. Here's a motion to set a public hearing for Monday, February 27th, 2013, to accept unanticipated funds from the State of New Hampshire in the amount of $212,000, $689.96, representing a one-time bridge payment from additional highway and bridge funds.
So that should help us on our bond payments.
Do I hear a second to that, to set up the
Second.
public hearing?
Second.
Okay, discussion.
Will that help us on our bond?
I
No.
don't think so.
Come on, Peter.
No, this money can only be spent on things you didn't plan or and already budget for. So it has to be something in addition to a regular budget appropriation. So it's not something you can use to offset an existing cost.
Okay,
So I
the-
can spend it on a bridge is what I'm saying.
Well, it looks like you could, additional highway and bridges.
Right, we did one earlier this last fall for additional highway funds that we're spending on the streetlights.
Yep.
It's the same sort of money.
Yep.
It's restricted to things that we didn't anticipate spending. So we can't say offset existing costs or costs that are already in the budget. So there has to
Okay.
be. So we can decide what to do with it later, but that's not intended to offset existing costs.
But it
You
goes
have a
into,
Good
it
list.
does go into DPW's budget
Well,
specifically.
specifically we'll go to bridges, which I have an idea of.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
when
okay,
that public hearing comes out, I'll be here.
okay,
You
great,
have a
thank
list,
you.
right?
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent.
So, any more discussion about setting this public hearing for February 27th? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approved. We are now set that public hearing. And I have another motion to set a public hearing on Monday, February 27th, to accept unanticipated funds from the lead service
It's
inventory,
lead.
line inventory, and replacement plan for large community water systems grant in the amount of $50,000 to complete a service line inventory and replacement plan, and to authorize town manager to execute all necessary documents. Do I hear a second to setting that public hearing for February
second.
27th? We'll also talk a little bit about this now. Peter, you plan to apply for this grant? Tell us about this.
Sure, so, this is unanticipated funds that wasn't appropriated by the state, they're just money that came in part of the ARPA funding. And when the EPA changed the lead copper rule in 2021, they now require all community water systems survey what they have for services, and they provided grants to go out there and do that. So we qualified for it, so we applied for it. We have a good idea of what we have for services, but we don't know everything. So this is an opportunity for us to actually go out and find out what we have for potentially lead. We don't think we have any, but this is a way to find out for sure. I suspect what we have is potentially some lead goosenecks, that little connection between the main and service, and we still haven't got a ruling from the state on brass. Because a lot of the older houses have brass service lines, and brass was used in lead. Lead was in brass back in the 1920s and 30s when a lot of these houses were built. The good thing about our water system, it's very stable, so we don't actually leach any of these metals. So this is kind of reaction to the Flint, Michigan fiasco, where they changed the water supply and they didn't treat it properly, and they leached all kinds of lead out of existing lead services that previously were not an issue. So this is kind of a reaction to that, so that all communities throughout the country can make sure they can eliminate lead from their drinking water.
Okay, thank you.
So this is just a kind of a down payment from them.
I'm prepared to set the public hearing for February 27th. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's set. Guess what? February 27th is going to be a busy meeting.
It is.
I move that we set a public hearing for Monday, February 27th, 2013, to accept unanticipated funds from ARPA Asset Management Program, AMP, grant fund in the amount of $90,000, $30,000 under the stormwater category and $60,000 under the wastewater category, to develop stormwater and wastewater asset management plans, and to authorize the town manager to execute all such documents.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Background, Peter, you want to give us a little, obviously the public hearing is going to be on the 27th, but you might as well give us a quick
This is-
background now.
Part of the federal money that comes annually to the states, they set aside a portion that they can use for planning grants, and they received extra money from the ARPA fund for the federal infrastructure bill, and this was ability, basically, so you can look at your water system, your sewer collection system and your drainage system to see what you might have for assets, what might need work, developing plans, taking a look at the condition of the systems, doesn't require you to do anything other than just go out and analyze certain sections of your systems. And later in the fall, there will be another one for water systems. So there's different pots of money, and these are all grants that just came about in the last 3 or 4 months.
Okay, thank you.
That's awesome. Finally, investing in infrastructure.
Yes.
Great idea.
May I ask a question before we
Please.
take a vote on February 27th? That is supposed to be, or that has historically been, the first day of our budget conversations.
Correct.
And I was just curious, I'm so used to sitting down here the first Monday, opening my tome and start talking about numbers. Does this
I
have
hope
any
that these
effect?
public hearings will be relatively short, since
Great.
people are giving us money.
And we're building in that time into the budget presentations for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that we have like 30 minutes set aside for sort of business, in case there's anything, because we just didn't want to have to wait another month to do some of these. Some of these are pretty time sensitive.
Okay.
So in fact, I think some of these had to be done in February.
Yeah, the second one has to be done
Right.
by March 1st submitted, so we have
Great.
a window.
February 27th is gonna be.
As long as
And I hear we're not getting a tome this year.
Well, we'll find out soon.
Do you want one?
Any other questions
No.
for the board? All those in favor of setting February 27th for that public hearing?
Aye.
It is set. Next order of business, a presentation by Sustainable Hanover Committee of Hanover Community Power. Aha!
I just learned how to do this today.
Oh,
Okay.
you. Now you're in trouble.
So, hi, I'm Judy Calla. I'm co-chair of Sustainable Hanover, and Yolanda Baumgartner, I think, will be joining me shortly, who is the other co-chair.
Right behind
She's
you.
right behind you.
Would you like to come up? Come up, please. Come up.
What?
Don't be shy.
Well, I think Judy's gonna do this. Well, I'm doing some of it. So, we just wanted to update you on Hanover Community Power and the rollout, so you know what's happening, when, and where you can get information, and Yolanda's gonna be in charge of some questions maybe at the end, or you can ask questions,
Sure.
however you wanna use whatever time we have left. So in terms of the timeline, originally, you probably know that Hanover Community Power was to launch around Monday, April 3rd, which is a little less than 2 months from today. The launch is likely to be delayed by 1 or 2 weeks because of some glitches getting data from Eversource and Liberty Utilities. And people are working very hard behind the scenes to come to some sort of agreement on that, but that was unexpected. However, we are going to stick to our regular plan for rolling out the launch. And there are 2 steps in that launch that are required by law, I guess. One is at least 30 days in advance, CPCNH, who's going to administer this for us, will be sending out a letter to all residents and businesses in Hanover, regardless of where they're getting their electricity, basically telling them about HCP and the launch and giving them details as to what they need to do and where they can get information, that sort of thing. And then within 15 days, and they're planning to do that on February 27th, the end of this month. We'll see. Within 15 days, we have to organize, Sustainable Hanover is organizing a community forum, basically for answering questions, and that has to be done within 15 days of CPCNH sending out that mailing. And we've reserved a room at the Richmond Middle School, their auditorium, for March 9th, starting at 6:30 in the evening. And there's no end date, but probably around 8 o'clock. And Henry Herndon from CPCNH has agreed to be up here and or at least by Zoom, help us with that meeting. So that's pretty much the timeline, and now I want to show you where you can get information to educate yourselves as well as direct people who ask you questions about Hanover Community Power. So Sarah Stewart, who is a new volunteer with Sustainable Hanover, has just, these pages aren't up, but they're nearly ready to go up. And this is on the Sustainable Hanover website, Community Power section. And I just want to explain basically the organization of it so that you can more readily navigate it when you go to it yourselves. So this landing page for Community Power has 3 questions. These were, we got help from Kevin Keller, who's a marketing professor at Tuck, who basically said, think of the people who will be reading your pages. And all of our many of our Sustainable Hanover pages, nearly all of them in the energy category, are organized by these 4 questions. The first is, what is community power, which is basically general information that people just getting started might want to read. The second one, why choose community power, is for people who are looking at barriers to participating or reasons to participate. So this is to help address some of those issues that come up with people. The third one, ready, here's what to do. These are for people who've read all they need to and they've looked at the barriers, they're ready to participate, although a lot of it is automatic for community power. And then the last one is for people who are all signed up, they're all set, they feel good about it, and it's ways to keep them engaged with Sustainable Hanover, other steps they can take. So if you click on one of these, it'll take you right to what is community power, but you can also just scroll down through. What is community power? We talk about what the status quo is in terms of a deregulated environment. Community power that developed after the aggregation law in 2019. The Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire and how we were very involved with getting that started. It's going to be the administrator for Hanover Community Power, and then finally Hanover Community Power, and there's our logo, new logo. So then we keep scrolling. Why choose community power? We do a lot explaining about our Ready for 100 goals and how this fits in with our desire to have renewably based electricity. And then here are 6 reasons for arguments for community power. 1, we can control how much renewable energy we have in our mix. We're going to be able to innovate with energy, with different programs. We have local control, community governance. The consumers can choose 4 different levels within Hanover Community Power, or they can choose to opt out of community power. Lower costs and rate stability. So those are all addressed in those categories. And then we come to ready, here's what to do. We've divided into 2 sections, what to do to prepare for the launch, and then how do you exercise your choice in terms of which selection do you make. So we're telling them, look for the letter in the mail, attend the forum, and there's another place where you can go for frequently asked questions. There'll be a link. I'll just show you that. And then the other section is exercise your choice. And then at the end, did it, celebrate, congratulations, thank you. And here, the link for frequently asked questions. Here they are. Basically, CPCNH had a generic section on frequently asked questions. We've customized, they did customize it quite a bit for Hanover Community Power, but we've done more work in trying to get it suited for our needs. So the basic categories are community power basics, governance and funding, role of the one's current utility, product options, EAP, net metering, rate setting, enrollment, and that's it. So that's where you can find a lot of information. Frankly, Everything I know is there. I don't know,
I
other than
don't.
what Pete tells me on a day-to-day basis, I don't know anything more than what you will know after you read this. So it's all there. And for other forms of communication, like listservs, who news that we do, letters to the editor, op-eds, banners, we're working on all those, the Instagram posts. Dartmouth students are helping us with an Instagram post. We hope that all of the stuff that we feed out through these other channels will use this information so that there's not confusion and people aren't saying things that aren't true, that kind of thing. And we're gonna have when a letter to the editor, someone's gonna review it who knows this to make sure that the content is consistent. So we're trying really hard to make the messaging consistent. So the last part of this would be any questions you might have, or Yolanda, maybe you would like to pose a couple of questions, you could quiz them. This would be a little quiz show.
Well, I think they have been in on it from the beginning, so I think you guys are a lot of the knowledge base that we hope you will share with citizens as they, because I find that the ordinary person just wants to flip the light switch and really doesn't think about any of this. And I think guaranteed many people will say, what happens when the power goes out? Who do I call? You know, so helping them understand the difference between what the utility is doing, distribution and transmission, versus the supply. I mean, that's really hard for people to get clear. But yeah, so I don't know that I can quiz you beyond what I know, because you signed all the documents all along the way.
The one question I have is, if the data's not coming in, is there anything that the select board can do to help, Liberty, encourage Liberty and Eversource to provide you what you need or provide what's needed? And then my second question is, April 3rd, we should be receiving something in the real thing, or is that happening February 27th?
The letter to each household, each account holder, is still scheduled to go out February 27th. And that is when people will, so we throw around these terms, opt in, opt out,
Yeah.
but actually the letter will say to opt in, opt out, here's the online place you go, here's the telephone number. So it should be very concrete.
Okay.
And so I think that'll be helpful. The other thing is that even though we say the rollout is April 3rd, for each individual person, it's going to depend on their next meter read date.
Okay.
So it's not like the whole community is transitioning on April 3rd. So that's a little complicated to talk to people about. But so if nothing happens, I mean, they really won't even know when the switch has happened until their next bill. And on that website, we really need to put a copy of the bill with the mark, pointing out exactly where they will see that a switch has happened. So we do have that. We need to put that in.
So there's a letter that goes out at the end of February. Will that contain the contact information or pushing people to this website?
No.
No.
So to actually conduct business with Hanover Community Power, there is a business work.
I'm just saying this
URL.
The letter on February, whatever, is likely to be the first time anyone's paid attention to this.
Right.
So that letter is going to be your first marketing, selling, introduction opportunity. So that letter has got to be pretty well drafted to
Right.
not create confusion that you're trying to avoid by all this information.
And CPCNH is sending out that letter.
I understand.
Yeah.
But that's the first time a lot of people are going to wake up or realize this opportunity is in front of them.
Right. We're hoping, though, that we will have introduced the concept ahead of time. So we are pushing out information before the 27th.
Now that our website is almost up,
Right.
we're ready to sort of do letters to the editor, op-eds, that sort of thing. We're gonna start those.
Okay.
And just to answer Joanna's first question, we've been told, thank you for offering to help, but we've been told that right now, it's better not for us to do anything publicly.
Okay. Well, you are on TV, but, so.
Can I see,
Yeah, I have a quick question. You mentioned all of those ways of getting to citizens. Will you put a hot button in the Town of Hanover website? Because most people won't know to go directly to you folks.
So we're working with Alex to do this.
Great, thank you.
He's part of our team.
I'm sure.
So,
Okay.
so I,
Second preference.
Just anticipating the public's concerns, you mentioned probably the one that most people are gonna have, the one that I had really, which is who do you call when, you know, you're left without power? And what other concerns have you envisioned people having? I haven't, you know, if someone is actually educated and takes the time to educate themselves in it, I should say, it's a very non-stressful thing, but change is scary to a lot of people.
Well, you do know that for people who are on the default supply with the utility, generally that's Liberty.
Yep.
A few 20 households are Eversource. They will be automatically enrolled in HCP. So it's going to get a little bit more complicated for people who don't like what the default option is for. There'll be probably four different options with HCP. And as soon as we know the rates, we will choose which one is going to be the default. So if somebody wants more renewable energy than what the default might be, although maybe we'll default up at the highest end depending on cost, or they want less renewable or less cost usually, then they'll have to make a decision about that. And then some people may choose to opt out of HCP. We hope they don't, but there are circumstances where it might make sense. Someone, for example, community power, there's some difficulties with the utility with net metering. I'm involved with community power. I might have to opt out. Or some people might want to opt in, like the New Hampshire Co-op, electric co-op. They will not automatically be enrolled in HCP because their rates tend to be lower and we might not be able to beat those rates. And so if they want to be part of HCP, they will have to actively opt in. So there's all these exceptions that are around that we've tried to describe them, but you know, it can get confusing quickly for some people.
Peter,
Please.
if I remember correctly, given the papers we've signed, part of the requirement in this deal, HCP, is that the rates will be less than Liberty.
One of them will be less.
One
yes.
rate will be less. So, and so whatever the town negotiates, my understanding was there would be a rate that's less than what we're currently paying. And then the rates, you know, let's say it's 100% green, it could be more, it could be less. But I think for me, probably like many of you, our electric bills have gone through the roof in the past couple of months. And so in theory, when we get our ACP, when this switches over, we should see a reduced per kilowatt cost. It could be ever so slightly, but you will have the option that will be cheaper. Is that correct?
Yes. Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the default has to be less expensive, but I do think the least expensive option does.
Our EAP says Hanover will only launch with a rate that is lower than the default rate. So our default rate will have to be
lower. The default rate has to be lower. Okay.
That doesn't mean that the default rate actually might be 100% green. We don't know that yet because we haven't got the rates yet. We don't know how that's going to play out yet until we have the data and our consultants can do bidding in the market to find out what the prices will be. But the information we've seen so far is we can beat the default rate by at least 7% to start with. And I'm not sure which one of those.
7%, that's a magic number this year.
Which one of those things would be to that, whether it's the default, the same RPS energy, or 33% green, or 50, or 100. I don't know which one will be that. And that's something that part of the rate, the Risk Management Committee and the Finance Committee from CPC&H, I'm a member of the Risk Management Committee. We will be meeting, we're supposed to have been today, but we had to postpone because we don't have any data, because we don't have any information. So once we have that, we will have a rate, and I'll know that pretty quick what that will be, and I'll be arguing for the highest one. So.
So I haven't heard this discussed before, but for those who have solar, who are putting electricity back into the grid, how will it impact their reimbursement rate?
So the way they would set it now, the way it's going to happen is if you are solar net metering number 1, which is 1.0, where you get kilowatt credit, that's what you'll get. If you're a 2, you'll get kilowatt credit. So you get actually a better situation. If you're putting solar in right now, you generate a credit on a monthly basis. If you generate more than you use, you will continue to generate the credit as opposed to the dollar credit. You get a kilowatt credit. So it's actually better off than getting a dollar credit. Plus, there's no tax implications there if you end up making more money at the end of the year. Some of them have to pay taxes on that revenue.
Currently, it's a dollar credit, I believe.
Yeah.
That's for net metering 2.0. 1.0 was kilowatt credit, and that's the way it will be kilowatt credit.
But presently, you don't get the full dollar credit.
Right.
Because there's a bite taken out for distribution, I think.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you switch, actually you'll get full credit, so you will be better off under.
Right on.
I like that.
Okay, thank you.
Great,
And it's
thank you.
answered more fully under frequently and asked questions.
It's right there, huh?
Yeah, it's right.
Great. Good.
Well, thank you guys
Anyway, this
for
has
all of the work
we've been at
you've
this,
done.
you've all been at this for 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah.
2019 on this one.
Well, remember
Before
back in 2015 when we did the Green Power Challenge and we tried to do this ourselves, just Hanover, and we got 300 and something people signed up, which Liberty told us was more people than statewide the utilities were getting by a factor of 10 or something like that. So I think there's real interest and demand for really clean electricity in town, so I'm hoping people will opt up.
Great, well, thank you
Thank
again. None of this happens by itself.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right, you have a question?
Yes.
Please come forward.
So Kari Asmus of Etna, and I also remember the discussion at town meeting where the default was going to be lower than the rate. But one of the other things that was said at the town meeting was that any administrative costs that the town was incurring because of this endeavor would be included in the rate. And I was wondering whether or not that has been the case. And I guess my other question would be, we have all experienced the spike in our electrical rates, and part of that has to do, I understand, with, right at the time when the company was going out to bid, that the rates just were very high and they are expected to come down at some time in the future when they can buy at a better rate. And so I was wondering whether or not, even if at the initial launch, if the default rate is better than, than your local company, if that were to flip, is there ever a time when the town would sort of, be looking to tell consumers that if you switched, or just every periodically, would there be a check-in that our default rate is still lower than what people could get otherwise? So those are kind of my two questions.
Try to answer those now, or
So your second question.
come to the mic, please.
So, Kari, your second question, Henry Herndon has said that they.
Judy, you need to face the microphone.
Use the mic.
Yeah,
Kari will
so just,
hear
and
you.
the camera will get you. And
She'll hear you.
So, it is my understanding that CPC&H will be reviewing the rates every 6 months, because that's when the utilities review them, so that they can be aware of what those rates are and try on a continual basis to meet those rates. What was the first
It
question?
was about administration, and I think it's.
Oh, the administrative costs.
It's rolled in.
Pete, you can help me.
I can help you here.
I think that the administrative costs are not to be borne by the town, they're to be borne by ratepayers. And so for the rates that we are proposing for the 4 different categories, they will already incorporate the administrative costs that have been incurred to date, and they will be paid in proportion to the amount of electricity that each customer consumes. So the town itself will not be out for those administrative costs. It'll be ratepayers.
That is correct. That's gonna be a fraction of a penny on your rate, so you barely even be able to see it. It's such a small amount compared to the energy piece. So if you look at a piece of pie, it's really a tiny little sliver that's the administrative day-to-day costs, the startup costs, which right now is several $1 million of money that's been loaned by Calpine and Ascend, and a number of consultants are working on a promise that if it doesn't launch, they're out money. So there's a lot of people who want it to launch because they have a lot of money sitting there, but it's also the communities. So there's no taxpayer dollars involved in this. Anything the town brings to the table can be reimbursed, but these are all things that as Judy said, will be covered in the rates by all the ratepayers. And if you opt out, you don't pay anything. But if you want to leave at any point, there's no penalty for leaving. There's no cost to join. So it's different than other third-party suppliers where there's usually a penalty if you leave earlier than a contract term. There's no contract term. You can come and go as you want monthly if you feel like it. So I wouldn't recommend doing it because it's a lot of work, because I'm doing that right now for the town accounts, and it's a pain in the butt.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Okay. Thank you very much. Again, congratulations. Really well done. The next item is a discussion of anticipated 2023 town meeting warrant articles. Alex, you're up.
So we got a little bit of a list here. I'm going to breeze through most of them unless there are questions, but I may spend a little bit more time on the leash law because I know that's been a big topic in the past and one that is very exciting. So just stop me if I'm kind of moving too fast, and Pete's also here to answer some questions if we need about 2 of these, though we're going to have more discussion about. Well, I'll just go through them all. All right, so the first is basically what we're trying to do here is make sure that the warrant articles, some of the ones that we're discussing on the staff side, are in line with what the select board is expecting, and if there's anything on the select board's expectations, that we have that on our radar as we start to put all of these together. So the first is just everything budget related. I don't have a list of all of those in front of me now, but those are relatively standard to some degree, and we plan on having obviously all of those listed for town meeting. Next is 2 warrant articles for bonds. One is for water and one is for wastewater. Both of these include loans and grants. Both of these are pretty large scale capital projects. Both of these, we don't have a tremendous amount of choice or time to really think about. I understand that over years past, there's been some pretty thorough discussion that has led to some of these plans. We can definitely talk a little bit more about each of those if you all would like to. Maybe I'll just run through all of them first, and then we can kind of go back. The next is rental housing.
Let's go.
Okay, just do one by one.
Yeah, let's go one at a
Sure.
time. So what is the appropriate time to talk about these? During the budget hearings?
So I think, if there's some sort of preliminary questions, I think now makes sense. Also, we are going to go through this in a lot more detail along with all of the capital items. So certainly if there's questions that you have at this point, you should, get all the information that you need. But I just want to make sure that when we look at any capital item, even if the expense is largely on the ratepayer, not the taxpayer, that we talk about everything together as part of kind of one plan. So that's why I just wanted to kind of put that caveat out there.
These are huge numbers. Peter, why don't you come on up? Can you just give us couple of minutes on each of these, just to give the background and somewhat
Sure.
the magnitude of what we're looking at.
Sure. Let's start with the biggest one. $22 million is a number that made me gulp.
How many, please? How much, please?
22.
22.
That made me gulp too.
Yes. If this project was proposed 2 years ago, it would have been half that. That's just what we've seen for the prices.
Really?
Things are just shot through the roof. It's not, and it's across the market, and part of that's driven by fewer contractors who can do the work and just the price of materials. And these are, material prices in piping and equipment have doubled, and that's just across the board. Fortunately, it's not with like rolling stock, like trucks and cars and things haven't gone up like that, but everything else has. So this is a project that we've been discussing for a number of years, 15 years. I remember talking about it way back in early 2000s when we did the last bond project. We were trying to find out what we needed to do to meet future requirements for what the state and feds were saying is nitrogen removal or strength of our wastewater. They wouldn't answer a question, which has been very frustrating. So it's hard to plan for something certainly of magnitude of that. So that's a piece of it. Our permit, a wastewater discharge permit, expired a little over 2 years ago, and we're waiting for the permit to be issued. We were hopeful that it would have been just a monitoring permit. The previous permit was a monitoring, a goal. We had a goal to meet a certain level. We can meet that most of the time, but over the last 2 years, maybe 2/3 of the time we can meet it. And then if you look, in the memo I sent, there's a little chart that shows what the line we have been set as a goal. Now the target one, where actually going to be a limit, we can't even get to. And the real driving here is that our treatment process just does not remove nitrogen. It's not intended to. It's not designed that way. So this is a process change. And this involves more tankage, and tankage just means more money, more pumping, recycling pumps that recycle the solid portion of the liquid train, and it deals with different types of bacterial conditions, anoxic, anaerobic, aerobic, so you're growing certain types of bacteria to allow them to essentially take the nitrogen that's fixed in solid form and make it a gas, for no better term. That's what you're trying to do. So to do that, there's probably somewhere in the order of $8 million to do that. The rest of the project involves old equipment. Equipment that's put in back in the early 60s is finally worn out. And we've done it's a testament to our staff in that they've kept it working. And it's a lot of preventive maintenance. But some of this equipment is just worn out completely. The headworks, for a good example, is that it's a dangerous place. The bricks and the blocks are deteriorating. That's what that is. It's a very caustic environment. Metals don't do well over time. Concrete doesn't do well. And it's a pretty good testament. This lasted almost 60 years. That's pretty good. But still, it's falling apart. There's also a number of life safety issues. We have a lot of electrical things that are old and electrical hazards. This is very high voltage, high amperage.
The last time we did a bond issue for the wastewater was not that long ago.
2008.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were these things, those needs didn't exist in 2008?
Some of those needs were, well, we had things we had to do in 2008 that we did, and we had to extend our outfall. We had some of these things were in the plan, but there was not enough money, and so they get pushed out. Building improvements.
There wasn't enough money in that bond issue
because of other things that the state added to our list after we passed the bond. They added an outfall extension. They added some equipment changes that we had to do, some process changes that we had to do that we did not have to do when they reviewed our plan originally. So those are things that were curveballs that thrown to us. That fortunately, a lot of this equipment actually was planned on being replaced around the time when these bonds get paid off. And if you look at,
and we're thinking about have we talked at all about the length of time for these bonds?
20-year bonds.
20-year bonds.
At 2.56% interest. There's a 10% loan forgiveness or grant up front. We've never got a grant before because we just don't qualify. It's demographics based. It's what income based, and we score a 0 every time. So other communities are getting 30 and 40% grant or loan forgiveness. So we don't qualify for that. When this money's gone, which is this year, we won't get any grant. So we'll lose. That's one piece. We'll lose the money. The equipment's not going to get any younger. The air quality.
So it sounds like we don't really have many options but to do this work.
That's correct. The only plus side is the project will take a better part of 4 years from design, construction, and then 1 year before we have to make our first payment, which is the year after our previous bonds are paid off. So we don't get the double whammy of still paying for equipment that we're replacing. We get those off the books. So we
get approval from the town to do a bond now, and that gives us the freedom to not actually pull down on that bond until some later time.
Yes, we won't have to pay back until we're completely done with the project.
You have to start paying it back.
Right.
4 years.
So that's like in 27 or
Um,
26. No, 26, the bond is over.
FY 28, I believe.
Yeah,
It's, I think you have a lot of information, which recognizes very complex of all
Yeah, I'm trying to
issues.
make it
But if you
simple.
just get to the money issue, is on page 23 of our packet, the last paragraph. It outlines the issues, and we have a couple of the bonds, as you said, which we're paying $607,000 for. Now, that payment will stop.
Correct.
So therefore, you start from that day forward, and with your suggestions, you're saying it's 20 to 23% over the current rates. I recommend building in an annual increase of 3 to 4%. So the point is that to hit the fees, it's not going to be a dramatic increase. But as you're planning it, which I know you plan it very well, so I think that's where we just need to explain to the users,
Right.
what does this mean out of my pocket?
Correct.
I recognize why you got to do it, and all that good information, and my opinion is I think it's well managed. It's just trying to communicate to the users, what does this mean for my pocketbook? And it's really not going to be that dramatic. I mean, that's my observation.
But it's
just of a long haul, and then possibly, who knows, between now and FY 28, if some grants become available. And I know you're very successful historically in getting grants when they're available. So I know you'll keep your eye on that.
So
There's a lot of things, but the money issue, I think, and the fees are what people are going to be
right.
confused by, and we just need to explain that carefully. So.
Correct.
And this is FYI, as part of the capital budget we're putting together, we've got some tables that Pete and I have been working on, just showing every year for the life of the debt, just what those costs are for the average ratepayer, so that people can sort of easily see all the years out.
Yeah.
And the plus side is our rates are substantially lower than the state average. It'll be a dozen years before we'll reach 2020 rates for the state average. That's how much below. So I know people don't want to pay more, but you look at communities around us and they're paying $300-400 more a year.
Can you ballpark me, when this kicks in, will the ratepayers see a 10% increase, a 50% increase?
Well, if you did it all at once, it would be about a 15%, somewhere in that ballpark. But if you do it over, if you increase, if you just do, okay, when the bond payment is start being made, and you don't change your rates to plan for it, and increase your rates slowly a little bit over time, you'll see a 15% increase at one time if you did it at one point.
Okay. So it's a one-time step function of around
Right.
15%, which you can mitigate a little bit through
Right,
that
by spreading it
structure
out
until
over a
then.
few years. Good.
Okay.
Peter, do you have enough land to do this? You talk about tankage and so forth.
This is within the
It sounds
current
like you're
footprint.
taking down a building
Well,
that's already falling down on your.
So the headworks piece, there's space around the headworks. That's where all the flow comes into the plant. There's
Okay.
room adjacent to that.
Alrighty.
The other tankage is expanding to the existing big rectangular tanks, and potentially adding a third one. The state wants us to go to a step further, spend more money. They said, give us more grant money, we'd spend more money, but they haven't interested in doing that. So the complicated thing is that the exact size has to be designed. There's room in the area that we need to build the tankage. That's part of the reason why we encourage the the garden club to move the greenhouse
Right.
because we need that space for additional equipment and tankage.
Okay.
But we can do it all, we don't need to acquire extra property.
Right, it's all within the current fence line, so it's not expanding
Wow.
beyond the current fence line.
Fantastic, that's great.
Questions to the public on wastewater bonding? Carl?
So at this time, I'm speaking as the Finance Committee Chair. We're meeting on Monday, and I've already sent out actually the wonderful information that we've already received on this. So I sort of feel like we're ahead of the curve in terms of the information. But one of the things that we have looked at over time is, everybody's undesignated fund balance. And the last time we saw something for the wastewater fund, I think that the undesignated fund balance was a little over $3 million, and then there was an asterisk that said that there was another $1 million that wasn't in that was going to be available for future capital improvements. So I think one of the questions will be, well, what about that $4 million? Is that already being used as an offset to get us down to 22 million or what have you?
I have not factored any of that in, so that's all money that can reduce the bond cost.
Right, and
Made
then,
that number.
right, which I think then could potentially lower the impact to the ratepayer. And I would also say that, when we were talking about it, I think the memo actually says an increase of like maybe even up to 22%, but I think that's just on the wastewater portion of the bill. And I think probably when most people get their bill, they don't say, well, how much has the wastewater gone up versus the water part? It's one bill. And so that base is bigger. So I think the increase, if I'm not mistaken,
They're
on
two
the...
separate. They are separate.
Oh, they are separate.
Correct.
Okay. I can tell you how much it costs to replace the pump, if you have your own septic system,
Right.
but I don't get a bill. So, so it comes in two separate,
Yeah, they come in,
envelopes?
it comes in there'll be two separate costs on your bill. You
Yes,
see them,
right, but do you write one check?
Yeah.
Yeah,
most people do. yes.
right. So I'm thinking that people, what they care about is the check that they write.
Right.
And they're not actually going to be seeing whether it's 15% or 22% and whether you ramp up or just say we're going to transition all at once. The other thing that caught my attention, and I'd like it confirmed, but it looks like then for the water bond, that the roll-off of debt is greater than the new debt. So it seems like that may also help balance things out a little bit for the ratepayer. Have I looked at those numbers correctly? And that you are preserving the bonding capacity from the past bond that rolled off.
We can talk about water rates.
Okay,
Just
all right,
water.
but one back on the water, on the wastewater. Am I also right that the city of Lebanon is also going to participate in paying a higher rate?
They pay, yes.
They will pay, so part of this will also be, given that it's a two-community wastewater system, it's not just Hanover that is having to come up with the money, it's...
They're treated as
The customer.
similar to Hanover customers. They pay a slightly higher rate to cover some of the additional administrative costs, but they don't pay, so they're treated as one customer. They break it down themselves
Yeah.
on who gets paid what,
But we don't have to think, if I'm right, that Hanover is having to absorb
the higher, full amount.
the full amount.
They're about 25 to 30% of the overall revenue stream
Right.
for rough numbers.
So that's pretty significant. So I guess that those are all things that, now that you've confirmed them, I will make sure that the Finance Committee and Bill, you can help too on Monday. Because these are big numbers, but again, we're just really fortunate that they're coming on, the expenses are coming on right when others are rolling off. That's, I think, really the main takeaway for everybody.
Well, and I think
Plus there's some,
ARPA funds, yeah.
and plus there's some serious amount of money in reserve
Yes,
in anticipation that this was gonna come.
yes, yeah.
We
So
want to use
it's-
it that way.
I don't think we're,
Yes,
20,
we want to use it that way.
Yes, okay.
Well, yeah.
No, I'm talking about the reserve in the wastewater account.
Right, which you can only use for that account.
Right.
Yeah, it has to be used within that account,
Oh, yeah,
so that's all.
but not under the fund balance per se.
No, we don't
No,
wanna
no,
use
no.
undesignated.
No,
We'll figure that out later.
No, just the wastewater undesignated fund balance, which is right now is at like
I understand.
90%.
That's a decision
It's not something that I've included in future rates, and also
We'll have to work ourselves through that during the budget process.
And there's
Okay.
also the,
Peter, anything on the 7 million, 8 million for the water that we should know about, other than it's needed?
the same timing here is that we've already paid off one loan, and this is actually, kept the bonding capacity, so we can actually do this project. The 7.8, there is grant money in that, for if we do find any lead services, or lead services with lead in them, the state will pay 50% of those costs and the service costs. Since we don't know what they are, we can't really know what that number is going to be for sure. It could be as much as 2 million, it could be $1.5 million, or it could be hopefully nothing. Nothing is actually a good thing. Means we don't have any lead, but it's going to be something in between. So we expect that there'll be up to $2 million in grants. Some of that's already loan forgiveness. Some of it will be some additional monies that will be coming in as up to about $500,000 that could be lead abatement that we don't know if we're going to get or not. I factored in the higher cost, assuming you don't get any, so we can see what that is.
Okay. Board, any questions for Peter? I look forward to those budget hearings.
Yeah.
Me too.
Alex, your next thing.
Okay, thank you, Pete. So next, the rental housing inspection ordinance is a warrant article I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on now. We spent quite a bit of time on it here and in other venues, but we are preparing that ordinance as previously directed by the select board for town meeting.
Have you made any changes since?
Not since, and we can bring that back if you want, but we haven't made any changes to it since our last
Okay.
go at it.
I think it's important to note that we approved this like last fall. And then after we approved it and said, make it so staff, we subsequently learned that it was something that we should probably have the town meeting approve,
Yes.
right? So, and that was after some fairly extensive public meetings and work sessions to kind of work out the kinks of the draft that came through. So it's not like this is a new thing.
No.
But again,
This is new legal, according to our lawyer, it would be in our best interest and people in our audience who pointed out that it's perhaps the best way to do it. Right?
I also think we shouldn't, I think this is a done deal. And I think we need to think about how we present this for town meeting and whatever else we need to do prior to town meeting. Because I don't anticipate any resistance, but I don't know. I just don't know. There's a piece of me that says this has the potential, unless we're really clear about it. I also know that some folks still don't have a full understanding. I still have people coming at me saying it's going to cost me $300 a year, not $100 a year. And so there's still misinformation out there. And again, I think we just have to pay attention to this one as we get ready for town meeting, not take it for granted that it's a done deal. We just got to be ready for the presentation.
Just clarify, is this a vote during the day or is this at the town meeting at night?
I believe it is at the meeting.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, at the business.
That's what I thought, I
Yeah,
just wanted to clarify.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Now, your favorite topic.
Yes.
Wait a minute, Kari, you have a question on this one?
Yeah, just one quick question, also on process. Is my understanding, so it's in the evening and people can make amendments to it from the floor. So there was somebody who wanted to know about who would pay if inspection was requested. And here, the board opined that it would be the person who's requesting. And somebody felt that that should be within it. So it would be possible for somebody to make that amendment or any other amendment or any other many amendments from the floor. But what would be what would be put forth would be the whatever, presumably what you adopted in October is my understanding of that
What are you
correct?
asking?
That
I'm not
it's
sure what you're
amendable?
asking.
Your question is,
Yes.
at town meeting, can people make an amendment,
Yes, yes,
offer
yes.
amendments to
Sure.
this ordinance? If it's an
Yeah.
ordinance, it's a
It's a
rental ordinance.
Yes, but
I
the
don't
town
know the
meeting
answer to that.
procedures, you all will have to.
That is a tricky one.
Well, I believe, I don't know, we will have to find that out.
Yeah, I believe it is, but again, I think
I
that
believe it
that's
is too.
something that should be part of your all discussion and time management and so on.
Thank you.
You mean it might be different because it's an ordinance as opposed to just a warrant item?
I'll look into that a little bit more.
Yeah, we have to find that out.
Okay, so this next memo here, I think I will try to run through each of the sections if folks want me to. Basically, what this is about is, this came from the leash law discussion last year. And I tried to break this down in detail, and it didn't get posted on Friday, so if anybody does want a copy, there's a few copies here, and it's also on the website now. Spent quite a bit of time with our attorney about this, and I will go through a few different sort of regulatory categories just to clarify what exists and what doesn't exist and what laws are where. I'll conclude with maybe some thoughts and then discussion. So I try to break out each of the different kind of regulatory categories. The first one is about service animals, and really the short story here is there is very little the town can do, even if it wanted to do something in regards to service animals. They're protected under the American with Disabilities Act, and there's really not much gray area there. And of course, actual service animals, are very well trained and unlikely to present any sort of issue in any environment. There is, of course, a gray area of animals that are like emotional support animals. I'm pretty sure I make this joke in there, which is there any other kind? But that what we've been advised is really to not ask questions, and that there is a little bit of a legal gray area there. But service animals obviously not the main focus. The next is animals inside of town buildings. So New Hampshire state law gives the select board pretty broad authority to regulate issues on town property, and I'll get to outside on town property next. But inside of town buildings, we've had some discussion in our department head meetings and this varies building by building potentially, and we need to do a little bit more work with our department heads if we wanted to move forward with a policy that did state one way or the other what we wanted to do with animals in buildings, but that sometimes actually animals getting tied up outside of a building actually presents a bigger issue because the animal's right outside the door and it's barking and it's making noises, when really it'd be easy if someone was dropping a book off or doing a quick exchange, transaction to just come in. Maybe they have the animal in their arms or on a leash, and that might actually be easier. But we are able to make rules within. This is not about staff bringing animals in. We would handle that separately in a kind of a personnel policy. Primex, our insurance carrier, there's a small amount of additional liability just doing anything other than like the most risk averse thing possible, of course. So animals inside of buildings does increase that, but not enough that them or our attorney felt like that should sway a decision one way or the other. They also feel comfortable that we could make some rules, which I can get back to a little bit later, that we could do things like allow animals inside of buildings that have to be under the control of the owner, that must be able to be physically restrained, and they can't be disrupting the operation or other individuals, and that they would feel comfortable that giving staff, if the staff and department heads were comfortable, the discretion to say that animal is allowed, that animal is not allowed, as long as we gave that, those staff guidance about service animals, et cetera, et cetera. But that was that sort of giving staff that subjectivity, if that's something that we wanted, totally fine to do from a legal standpoint. Number 3 is animals in outdoor town spaces. So the same RSA that gives the select board the authority to regulate animals inside of town property, which is RSA 4111A, that gives the select board the same authority to adopt ordinances that regulate issues on town property. So that may be a town-owned park or a sidewalk, for example. This does not include, which is important, anything that's open to the public but privately owned. So that includes the Dartmouth Green, that includes Pine Park, that includes anything like that. Anything that is owned by a private individual or a nonprofit that the select board does not have the authority directly, or Trescott Corporation does not have the authority to make rules about. And I'll come back to a little bit more about that in a minute. The next is animals on non-town property. So this is very limited. There's basically only 2 RSAs that that sort of allow the select board through town meeting the ability to make rules outside of town property, and this is RSA 46630 and RSA 46631. Basically, it's worth just noting that outside of each of those, which I'll discuss in a moment, there really is no statutory authority for the select board to make rules. However, there certainly could be a voluntary agreement among private parties to create a clear and consistent set of rules on town property, on different private properties. And of course, we do get people who write in or call when they have an issue with a dog, regardless of, you know, what type of property it's on. Most people don't make those ownership distinctions. Next is RSA 46630. This was the sort of discussion last year was around this RSA. This was the one that provided a question that could be given to town meeting. Basically, what that RSA does is a couple things. One is that creates by that being passed at town meeting, that puts the law in place. I know there was some discussion last year about, does that enable the town to create an ordinance on top of that? By adopting 46630, that's it. You know, the state leash law becomes the law. However, and there's no way you can't modify it or do any customizations about it. But RSA 46630 has some issues, which I think was part of the confusion generated in the discussion. Yep. Is, for example, basically what it does is not allow dogs to be at large. And at large, you have to meet 2 conditions. One is off the premise of the owner and not under the control of any person, unless accompanied by the owner or custodian. And if then there's a number of different things that are exempted, such as, I don't know if I have the language for me, hunting, training, trials, guarding, and herding are all exemptions of the at-large, that dogs are allowed to do those things off the premise of the property and without the owner directly near them. So our attorney does not feel like this is a very easily enforced law, and the idea that basically by passing this, and this will make a little more sense in a moment, but by passing this, it takes all the enforcement authority and puts it on the local government, because there is a state law already in place, which I'll discuss in a moment. But basically it puts all the enforcement on us, and beyond the fact that it would just be challenging to enforce these sorts of things in the areas where where there are some issues with this broad of a law, that means the police have to, get out of the vehicle, go walk into, a potentially conserved property, right? And they're not able to respond to other calls. So there's definitely an expense related to the enforcement that we haven't calculated, but would be not insignificant. But again, our attorney and I agree that this would be really difficult to enforce and may not really be defensible as far as issuing violations, and that there's a lot of exemptions and sort of loopholes here. Some of the ones that you can imagine people easily saying, well, my dog is herding, or I am hunting because I'm carrying a firearm, or training, right? And that's all subjective. There's no way to prove any of those things one way or the other. The goal of what I recommend ultimately here is to try to have something that is clean and is not that sort of subjective. So that's the short summary on 46630. 46631 is interesting because it is an RSA already in place. There's already a state law that we have no say over whether it exists or not. This state statute makes unlawful a whole bunch of different things, including if a dog is at large, though they have slightly different wording for some reason than the other RSA. If a dog barks more than 30 minutes straight at night, if a dog causes injury to a person, or also one of the clauses that I found particularly interesting is that if the dog digs, scratches, excretes, or causes waste or garbage to be scattered on property other than its owners. So that means that is already a violation of state law for a dog to go to the bathroom on someone's property that isn't their own property, or to cause waste, et cetera, et cetera. So that's already on the books. And that is something that we already have the ability to enforce. And again, there's about 5 or 6 bullet points in 466 46631 that identify the dog nuisance related things. So that, again, law is already on the books. Basically, when you go through all of this, there are a couple things that I think you can highlight as sort of important questions. One is making sure we sort of define what the need is and what the problems have been in the past. Two is making sure we already understand all the laws that are out there. For example, I did not know, even at the beginning of working on this, that state law was already in place, even though it's just one RSA down from the one that was discussed last year. The next is types of animals. This is probably not worth wading into unless there's a need to wade into it. I just found it sort of interesting that basically whatever language we want to use, do we want to define any regulation to dogs? Do we want to define a regulation to domesticated animals? Or do we want to use the New Hampshire state definition, which is non-controlled animals? And of course, I found that just somewhat, enjoyable that includes like ostriches and camels and things like that those are perfectly allowed by state law to just have around. But as far as I'm aware, we haven't had any issues with those animals. But we could define any one of those categories, again, using the state definition, domestic animals, which is like dogs, cats, turtles, rabbits, things like that, or just dogs. Next is the responsibility of owners. And our attorney agrees with the general attempt here to try and put as much responsibility on the owner as possible, that people should be aware of what their own dog does or doesn't do. They should be aware of their own behaviors. They should be aware of other people's reactions and behaviors. Like you shouldn't just be running around with your dog and not paying attention if there's people around you. Some of these things would fall in the common sense category, but it feels important to delineate them here. So, we need to do things like define an owner or caretaker or whatever that is. We would need to have very visible signage that was clear and consistent. And we could have things like signage that whatever the rules were that we created, if we created new rules, that someone entering public property, right, the same way that when you go to a website and you accept the cookies, right, the same way that you walk onto the private property, or the property with a dog regulation, right, by entering that property, you are agreeing to abide by the policy, and the policy would just need to be clear and listed on a sign. And the next thing is that there may be different needs in different spaces. And so the two broad categories that seem to get broken down as I sort of worked on this a little bit was that there may be places where a physical restraint, which I'm using instead of leash because maybe the dog goes in a little carrying thing or a stroller.
Or there's electronic devices too.
Oh, electronic devices, that's right. There's probably, right, there's those two. So some sort of restraint device that would need to be used at all times. And so a good example of that in my mind is a sidewalk in the downtown. Probably no matter what happens elsewhere, we don't want dogs running around in the downtown or the street without being on leashes or something. But there may be other locations, for example, a trail or a park, where maybe the physical restraint is only required to be used if need be. And basically, when we talk about if need be, I think personally, and spending some time with our attorney about this and going through all the different state statutes, there is actually a way to define this that is not that gray area or subjective. And it basically rests on whether somebody else is uncomfortable or not. Instead of trying to understand, was the dog barking or not barking, or was it, jumping on me or slobbering, or whatever, there's none of that sort of back and forth that would be required in the sort of regulatory framework that I'm recommending here, which is basically that the animal needs to be under the control of the owner, which means the animal needs to be able to respond to commands. That two, the owner has to have the ability to physically restrain the animal if needed, so that not only do they have a device, but they need to be able to use it. So, a 5-year-old is not going to be able to physically restrain a 120-pound dog, even if they have a leash. So the human has to be able to restrain the animal. And 3 is the if need be. And basically the only trigger there would be if someone says, please put that dog on a leash. And then that's it. And what we're sort of proposing here is that would be the line. And then if it ever did escalate to an enforcement where the police had to be involved, the only thing the police would, did you ask for that dog to be restrained? Yes, that's it. It wouldn't be, well, was the dog really bothering? No, my dog is perfectly well trained. It's not bothering anybody. It would take all that out of that, and it would just be on, hopefully, the person to recognize that somebody else is uncomfortable and just put the dog on a leash. But if not, and the person vocalized that they were uncomfortable, then you put the dog on the leash and end of story. No back and forth or no gray area there. So That is the idea, that basically if the select board wanted to move forward here, there's already a state law in the books that applies to some of the most problematic types of situations. The barking at night, the defecating on other people's property, the biting somebody, things like that, of course, there needs to be violation and enforcement penalties for that kind of stuff. But then also we could imagine creating another policy framework that applies to town property, where some sections of town property, physical restraint required at all times, some sections of town property only if need be. The need be is just as I described it. And then the goal would be to then work with stakeholders in the community. So for example, the college, the Truscott Corporation, Pine Park trustees, and put stakeholders together and basically say, here's what we're thinking, how we want to do this. Could we try to get, the 5 or 10 private property owners that have most of the private land that's publicly accessible, could we get everybody on the same page with the same rules, so that we could create clear and consistent signage, do an education campaign, and then basically in Hanover, people would know what the rules are wherever they go. It doesn't matter who owns it. We get 95% of the stakeholders to agree, place the signs. The only difference is that on our signs it will say, per ordinance, whatever, and on the, in Pine Park it's going to say, per the Pine Park trustees. So that is the idea, and I will stop there.
Thank you for that deep dive.
Sure.
You've been busy on this topic.
Yeah.
You know more about this now than you probably ever wanted to know.
Certainly more than I did know.
Yeah, I just want to echo what everybody's been saying. This is a ton of work and it's really appreciated. It's so nice to have it just laid out. It was a mess last time we thought about this, and it really, a lot of my fears have been quieted a little bit, that it's not a mess anymore. I'm still amazed at the state of New Hampshire and the way they make laws, but that's really not our purview, unfortunately, I guess.
So unless we wanted to adopt that first RSA, basically everything else can be done by the town as a matter of an ordinance or policy.
At the select board level, that's correct.
At the select board level.
Yeah.
I haven't quite finished. That statute is just, I have no other word for saying it's just dumb. It serves no purpose. There's so many loopholes. Anybody can say, yeah, my dog is in training. It just doesn't make any sense to bring that to town meeting, in my opinion. It just is going to confuse people. It's probably going to hurt us more than help us, especially if we go along with a lot of the bright ideas that I think Alex has brought up and we can work on.
Okay. And John?
Thank you. I was trying to read it. It's very small font. I should describe
You
it.
printed it small too.
It looks right there, but that's okay.
Yeah, that one, I don't know what happened there too.
But I think that, as you were describing this, I was thinking of all the places that I go and play and hike and walk. And, there are signs at Truscott, all your dog must be on a leash at all times.
Yep, Truscott is that way.
That's our water supply.
Right.
And that makes sense. Pine Park, dogs run free, but whenever I walk and I'm with people who have a dog who is not a social dog and a dog approaches, I just say, hey, can you put your dog on the leash? And I've never had a problem. Some people may have had problems, I have problems. So, I think, and I agree with you, downtown, our sidewalks are packed with people and benches and clocks and bus stops and, dogs running free and cars. Oh yeah, cars. But I rarely see a dog that's not leashed downtown, but, I think policy and education is a good way to go as a starting point. And that's I think what I'm hearing from you, and working with the various stakeholders.
Yeah, I think so, and I think the goal here, and I know this can be a fine needle to thread sometimes, but I think there's a balance here, and we don't need to there's the sort of nuclear option, which isn't even that good of a nuclear option because it's got so many loopholes. But beyond that, something that places a little bit of trust in people to be responsible and reasonable, like the experiences you just mentioned, but that does provide, you know, the enforcement penalties if that doesn't happen. And then the goal being that we can educate people. If we get all the signage clear and all the rules clear, we could do a little push of a campaign about it at some point. And then maybe people will have a, you know, a good understanding of, you know, what's allowed and what's not. And hopefully your experiences are similar where, you know, people can have a dog off leash, and if there's nobody around and they're picking up after them and everything's great. But if a group of, you know, young kids, and people should be aware of that and be responsible. And if we can do anything to encourage that, seems like a good direction.
The other thing that I thought was interesting, in terms of enforcement, I think, you know, if you feel uncomfortable, that's all you have to do is tell the officer, report the officer that you felt uncomfortable. So I think, you know, that is, as long as that's the policy that we adopt, and, you know, or some variation thereof, I think that's clear. And it's not, oh, well, my dog is always friendly,
Right.
compared to someone who feels uncomfortable, you know, and I don't know, that seems reasonable.
Yeah, I think, I agree. I think what we need to define in that sense is what is under control, because there are different ways. I mean, a physical control with a leash, as Alex just described, may not be adequate, and other techniques may be adequate, but I agree with you.
Yeah, just don't want to go down this common sense road, and then someone raises the issue, it must go to town meeting for a vote. So we have triple checked with our attorney and others saying that the select board can.
I'll send you all the RSA.
I don't need to.
Okay,
Just,
you can, yeah.
Just stating it for the record that we have had legal opinion that we can move along with common sense, and as you said, with the other partners that own private property.
Right.
It'd be great if we could all have the same consistent approach. Again, common sense. I've been involved in 2 incidents where the person said, oh, I got it under control, and they didn't. And it was not pretty. And so therefore, there's a methodology in the common sense approach to deal with that individual because they're not being appropriate.
Right.
So
I think that underlies how important it is to do what we've never done, which is education. I mean, just confronting someone in the middle of a Bald Hill or whatever, which I think is town property. I'm trying to remember what town property. What is it, town property?
It's a third.
Yeah, thank you. So that's even more tricky.
But I think they could all.
But regardless, I mean, the important thing is we've never tried this at all. And it seems far superior way to start than the ridiculousness of the New Hampshire state law.
Is there anyone here that would like to speak to this?
I'll say something briefly. David Oswald has spoken on this issue before. I agree. I appreciate your translation of the legalese about 46630 is dumb. That law sucks. I don't think it can even be called a leash law, actually. So we talked about it. Let's toss it, in my opinion. I like that fairly clear idea if someone's made uncomfortable by the situation, then the dog should be physically restrained, which I believe is what I understood. And I think that makes a lot of sense. That's all. I'm going to take 20 minutes.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, David, for keeping us on the
ball.
on the ball on this one. So, what I'm hearing, if I hear it correctly, is we want to pursue the ideas that you presented, and I don't know when we can actually act on this, but we don't.
Just not.
Sooner than better.
Yeah, but we don't have a deadline.
But we don't have a deadline with town meeting.
Right. Also, I can take that off the list for warrant articles
Right.
and add that to the list once we get a little further past budget stuff.
Yep.
And we want to do it right, so we need time to do it.
Good.
Okay.
We can do that.
Thank you, Alex.
Everybody?
You're welcome.
It's really nicely done, Alex. Thank you.
And,
Yeah, I tried to get it all organized there, and it was a learning
I think it was
experience.
you who saved our bacon last year, so thank you.
Well, I'm not, as I said last year, and I think you can check the videotape, I'm not a lawyer, but when I read this on page whatever, they're not numbered, and I go, this means nothing. It's absolutely nothing.
Thank you for slowing us down.
All right, so the next one, Mink Brook Community Forest. In 2020, the town acquired this property to conserve a majority of it, and also to create some very much needed clustered, sustainable, I think they're going to be net zero workforce housing units. The language on the 2020 warrant includes, quote, approximately 4 acres will be transferred to Twin Pines Housing Trust for future development of a small cluster of cottage homes for workforce housing, subject to future approval at town meeting. So we got to go back and get that future approval at town meeting part. That is something that I'm working with Rob on. There is I believe there is a memo from him in the packet as well. One of the notes that we wanted to make is that although there was no number of units, as I understand it, committed to in the warrant article, there was discussion of a number of units, but the zoning that we have in place now, I don't remember the unit numbers off the top of my head. It is possible to build it at more units than what was discussed, and so we just wanted to make sure to flag that for conversation at town meeting, so nobody was surprised or felt like, just want to make sure to put all that up front.
I think it will be really important. So what was tossed around, and I think we should talk about it now, because we don't want to spend a lot of time at town meeting talking about it, I don't think, is that the number that was put out there was, I think, around 14, 15, something like that. And according to your note and in the zoning, proposed changes to the zoning, we could double that.
Right.
Roughly.
About, yeah.
28 or so. So I think it's important to put that out there so we're not, so people know, so the neighbors know. Because that neighborhood is extremely well organized, and we should just be having frank conversations that we have a workforce housing problem, a challenge, and Greensboro Road, just like downtown, just like Lime Road, has water, sewer, power, good infrastructure, and that's where we have to have, that's where we need to put our housing. We can't really afford to put it on the backside of Moose Mountain. We need to put our housing where we have the infrastructure. So I just think it's important to put it out there now and to have our neighbors having conversations between now and May.
Okay.
And also, quite frankly, to brag about the fact that we are doing something that we've talked about for a very long time, and we're talking about it in the long range planning, and not to hide our pride in the fact that we are working on this very real problem.
And in a way that, for whatever it's worth, I mean, this was all worked on, long before I came here, but I was really excited to, as I was learning about Hanover when I was interviewing and all that, and I saw some of these projects that were being discussed, and since coming here and talking to Rob more, like this sort of development, I mean, we really have two very broadly, we can do development and build housing, in the urban compact zone, to some degree, right, where there's already density. But then you think about the rest of town, most of which is not in the urban compact zone, but we don't want to be just cutting down forests to subdivide and build trees. I mean, they did that in New Jersey, and it's not great. And there is a way to build on land without destroying all of the land. And I think this sort of cluster development where you leave 95% of the land that's going to be permanently conserved, and you put slightly higher density housing in a smaller part where those people can then enjoy. I mean, that's just an amazing way to do this. And I think it's a good model for other communities out there that are, have green space and want to build housing. You don't have to take 200 acres and, make 10-acre lot. Like, you just don't have to do it that way. I think this is a good model.
Yes.
It's just, I don't know if this is relevant, but when we first proposed Guile Track, we had to increase the density significantly to make the economics work. So it's not the first time that we've had the opportunity, or in that case was the need, now it's the opportunity to have additional development on a already existing piece.
Just again, clarification, there would be some people who would say, well, that's too many units in this section. I'll raise the opposite. You have X number of acres, I think you said 4. Why can't we do it on 10 and put in a Guile Track approach? In other words, double the number. I'll just make it a number, just double the number. So instead of,
Because there's a permanent easement on the land.
So that's why I just need to understand what the limitations are.
I think the 4 acres is a hard limit, as I understand
It
it.
was part of the deal of the conservation with the Trust for Public Lands. So there was a house there was 4 acres that was set aside for workforce housing, and then the rest has a permanent conservation easement on it. So
So four,
can't
so it's
touch that.
4 out of how many acres then?
Ooh, 90 something,
Yeah.
I think.
I don't remember the acres.
Something
Total,
much.
yeah.
So it's a very small piece of the
Yeah.
pie that was agreed to,
Right.
and we're locked in, there's
Yeah.
no change.
Well, we're changing the zoning, so we're getting twice the density, and, you know, quite honestly, that's roughly, you know, if you were to build kind of the 60s subdivision, suburbia, which you have in my neighborhood, my lot is 9,000 square feet, so that's 5 units per acre, roughly in that neighborhood. 5 or 6 units per acre, that's how small, those are pretty small lots for, yeah, that's about 8,000, 9,000 square foot a lot. But my understanding is that this is going to be net zero, thoughtful, well-designed, looking at the 21st century standards that we should be encouraging for kind of a nice community. So I think design will be critical in order to make this a success.
Agreed.
Kari Asmus speaking for myself, and I apologize for being such a frequent flyer tonight, but I've actually been thinking about many of these things, as you all have, for multiple years. And I just want to make the observation that at town meeting, one of the types of warrant articles that generates the most discussion is this sort of thing. I remember, you know, once we were being given land, and over the course of a rather long discussion, you know, one person got up and said, when I came here, I thought this was the best idea, and now I think it's the worst idea. And that just sort of spoke to how important it is going to be, I think, to get information out in advance of town meeting. And I'm mindful that that is almost like 3 months away from tonight. And I think it's going to be very important to get feedback from the Conservation Commission. You know, you look at the map and, you know, right now that's where the parking lot is. So we're giving away the land that has the parking lot on it. Where's the parking, you know, going to go? And I know I've been in that parking lot when it was completely full. So it's not like it's not needed. I also remember Guile Hill. I was on the school board, and, you know, the plans didn't take into account the school bus. You know, can we talk to the schools and see what, you know, their needs are? And as it was mentioned, you know, the neighborhood, what are their concerns? What can be mitigated? I just think that it's so important that we illustrate, or that you all illustrate before town meeting, that instead of just saying, leave it up to the select board to figure out the details afterwards, that you've actually heard the details and that you're going to be mindful, you know, when those last documents, you know, are signed. And again, I guess I'm thinking about this both in terms of the meeting going smoothly, but also just to make sure that, I think, you know, we may hear that there are people that feel differently, and we just want everybody to feel, you know, heard that night. One question that I had, I know that affordable housing developments are by special exception, which means that the ZBA would have to give their approval. Would we be, yeah, it's a special exception. Affordable housing. So to get that extra density, or workforce, well, but I thought it was through.
I don't know, I'd have to look at the zoning.
But what we were talking about, to get that extra density, I think is a special exception, which would go through the ZBA. And maybe we would want to give the land to Twin Pines regardless of what ZBA says, or transfer it, I think is probably a better phraseology. But I guess the question that might also come up is like, well, what if the ZBA says, you know, no, that the extra density doesn't work? Do the economics still work? You know, what would happen? So there may just also be some need to explain what the steps are along the way, where also if the neighbors have concerns, you know, there would be this stop with the ZBA, and then there's the planning board process. I would just be very careful to to make people understand that it is a process, and not just a,
Okay.
waving of a hand.
Thank you. Anything more on Mink Brook? We got a way to go here.
Yeah, so the next one,
Any more questions
nope,
on Mink
sorry.
Brook? You don't wanna? Okay.
No, thanks.
okay.
Okay with Mink Brook.
So next one, I'm gonna do kind of two together, which is RSA 4114 and 8080. And basically, they are both related to town meeting enabling the select board to sell and purchase property through a public hearing process. The town meeting would still, via petition, retain the ultimate control over this by being able to stop any individual sale or purchase. This is something that a majority of towns in New Hampshire do have in place. And it is something that we feel is pretty key in enabling the town to address some of the housing issues going forward, just that there doesn't have to be the sort of 1 year lead time between making decisions about some of these things, but still allowing town meeting to retain the ultimate authority over the decision-making process. And so these are two separate warrant articles. One is just, the 4114 is just sort of in general. The 8080 is for tax deeded property specifically.
I'm sorry, Don, I didn't mean to.
No, that's okay.
How does, makes tons of sense in this day and age of real estate, but how does town meeting still retain ultimate control? By being able to stop, but how's it?
Yeah,
we buy it, let's say we buy our property on May 20th. Town meeting has 11 and a half months.
Oh, so basically it's via petition, so it's outside of town meeting.
Okay.
And there's public hearings that are required to be held before any purchase or sale could take place. And I'm sure
There's two public hearings, and if, after the public hearings, if 25 people don't like that decision, they can call for a warrant.
Okay.
right.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So, and all of which makes sense. And you said most of the towns in New Hampshire are doing this.
I believe 141 towns have it out of the 215.
That's important to know.
Yeah. Yeah, it
You're in
was,
line.
yeah, most of the towns around us have it, yeah. So obviously, of course, we can talk more about that, and we'll put more information together ahead of time about everything there. All right.
This is Rob's instigation?
This is Rob and I, who both given it our thumbs up. Next is veterans tax credits. There's a provision at the state level that basically our credit, which I think is for $500, drops down to $50 if we don't reauthorize it. So I think there's maybe one or two warrant articles that have to go along with that, but pretty self-explanatory. Okay.
Well, I'm gonna slow down here.
You just told us to speed it up.
Yeah.
I know. This is, I usually, I'm gonna take a risk here. This all started when we had a $50, and we as a select board suggested that others from the veterans committee suggested that we increase it to 100. It went to town meeting, and in the town meeting's infinite wisdom, they moved it to 500, which I personally thought was a mistake because it's not need driven. And we went from having a potential credit of, I'll make up a number, 10,000, all of a sudden it became 60,000. So I asked the question, is this an opportunity to revisit the right number? Again, if this was need-based, I would have no questions at all. But it's not need-based. It's just if you served in the military, between this and then,
Or
you're
you're married,
eligible.
or you're married to someone who served in the military.
It's just very strict. If you meet these criteria, you are eligible for this credit, and it's not insignificant. I'm a recipient of that credit, so I'm
So you can touch it.
I'm allowed
The rest
to
of us
touch it.
won't.
I'm allowed to touch it. So is there any appetite on this board to think about what the right amount is? I always thought of it as a token, a thank you, but $500 in my mind goes beyond it being a token.
What number would you pick?
Hmm?
What number would you pick?
I'd go back to the 100 we suggested 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
See, I think 100 in today's world is less than a token.
Okay? Well, I'm not,
I mean, if I'm gonna pick a number out of the air, which I'd pick 250, but it's,
Is it, is
I would
it
think
really
you-
$60,000? I didn't think.
yeah,
I think-
68,000 now.
68,000.
Yeah,
So what if we
68,000
could-
now.
I suggest we can confirm whatever the impact is. Can we then talk about it?
Well,
Unless you absolutely know that that's the.
oh, I know the number, let me, I wrote it down.
Okay, I don't.
My memory, I did the math, and it's now $500 times 100 and something people in the memo, and it came out to $68,000.
Okay.
So half a point, a little more than a half a point.
Peter,
Yeah,
those are the people who availed themselves of this, or is that the people who could avail
no,
themselves?
who did avail themselves of it, and it jumped dramatically when it went from 50 to 500. So I don't know
Can
if
we
there's an
mull
appetite.
it?
Huh?
Can we mull that?
Absolutely, you can mull
Let's
over.
think
I'm
that
just-
over. We've
I'm
got
just
some
saying.
I mean, we're gonna plan on preparing a warrant article, something in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to.
Oh, no,
guess.
no. I think we all agree it should be more than 50, and Peter doesn't think it should be 500. So let's think about what the number.
But yeah,
What
we
number
just.
we-
Yeah, and then I'll need some direction on what we're bringing forward to,
Yeah,
Okay.
well, there'll have to be a warrant article,
right,
but that'll state a number.
right.
So
You
that-
fill it in, just leave it blank. We'll just like.
I'll give one blank copy to each of you.
And the
Come
other,
on, we have to have a little fun. It's been a long night. We still have a long way to go.
the other thing that you were party to, Alex, was that when we put it up to 500, it was a very, very spirited town meeting. Lots of impassioned citizens coming to the microphone on either side of this issue, or the many sides of this issue. So it was not something that just
Right,
said.
But we proposed 100 at that time.
okay.
Just a clarification, I know that this, you have veterans, and then there are some other discounts
Yeah,
that
there,
have not been impacted by any
That's
state
correct.
regulations.
That's
So wherever we have it now, we can just leave it alone.
it's set, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so
Okay. The next one is land use change revenue. Basically, I did, Kari, I got your email too about the second piece of this, but basically there was a sort of placeholder number on a warrant article last year, and so we missed a year of payments because it wasn't the right number, so we basically just need to go back a year and correct those. So I think we're gonna need either 1 or 2 warrant articles, because 50% of that money, which is the money that is the revenue that's generated when someone takes property out of current use and a 10% penalty is applied, that money is dispersed. And anyway, the numbers for that authorized the disbursement weren't the correct numbers last year, so we just need to do this past year's numbers and then do the prior year's numbers.
So we'll have 4 this year. We'll have 4 warrant
Yeah,
articles.
probably, unless you can list the different years on the same warrant article, which I don't know.
That might be more efficient if we could do
We'll
that.
certainly do the efficient route if possible. But no promises.
This is a long town meeting.
Yeah, right.
So if you can combine
Save a
those-
minute or two.
That's usually yours, isn't it, Athos, or mine?
It has been mine.
So that's in the queue, is just correcting that. Then the last one is
before you go,
Sorry.
I need to correct my numbers. At $500, we now have a $56,000 500 benefit. At $50, it would be $5,650. So the number now is 56.
The relative sounds right.
Well, 113 times 500 is 56,500.
I have a different number in the budget, but I have 60,000.
Okay, all I'm saying is that.
But it would be the
they say
same.
there's 113 participants at $500. I think that's gonna,
Yeah, I don't know the number.
Rounds to
I'm just
60, when you're
yeah.
talking about a $30 million budget, it's
Right.
rounds to 60.
okay, but my number of 68,000 is wrong. I believe it's 56,500.
okay.
I stand corrected.
So the last one that I've got on my list here is a purchase of a new fire engine. This is already a couple years beyond its expected life, I am pretty sure. And basically, when you heard from Pete earlier about the absurd rise of costs of some of the projects of the wastewater project, we're not in a dissimilar position as far as the purchase of a new piece of apparatus. After Pete and Marty, Public Works and Fire Chief, talked about it a little bit and did a little bit of costing things out. And this is not, this is nearly, I believe, a $2 million purchase. But if we do it in the way that Marty has outlined in the memo that is attached, which is that basically we're committing to the purchase this year, even though we don't need it for another couple of years, but it locks in our pricing, and he is estimating that we will save $250,000 by doing that, which is more than 10% of the cost of the purchase. And so that is not an insignificant savings, because it's just the prices are going up every year, but we have the ability to lock that in.
Is it legal to do that?
Yeah, how do you figure it, how do you do it?
Because it's $1 million, it's $1 million piece of equipment, and if we buy it now, according to Marty's memo, you're gonna save $250, because in 2026, it would be 1.25 million. But can you,
I guess is the question, can
is it
town
legal
meeting?
to do that now?
I didn't see that memo.
How do you do that, McKenna? How do you do that?
Well, we'll have to look into that.
Okay, one second. So, and is this engine 4?
Yeah,
I didn't get that.
that's the one that he highlighted, engine 1.
I didn't get that.
My sense is that it is possible
1997
to do
Does that
this.
sound right, you guys, engine 1? It's not right,
That's engine 4.
it's engine 4.
2005, 2006 replacement.
Is this the big ladder truck?
No.
No.
So it's not the one that's highlighted.
Sorry, I didn't get the memo.
Yeah, I've got engine 1 highlighted on the
Now,
memo here.
because if we order it now, we get today's pricing, even though it won't be delivered for 3 years. And not experience the 7% increase per year that's been going
Right.
on.
I mean, it makes financial sense, it's
It makes-
just, I just don't know.
It makes total financial, I'm sorry.
I mean, if we can't do it, we.
The only
you know.
question is, in my mind, is this is in plan with what the fire department wants, because over the past 3-4 years, we've revised what the fire department has revised what the fire department thinks it needs moving forward, so I'm just a little worried that Marty's.
I mean, this is, as far as I'm aware, this is
Yeah.
part of the more scaled down, over the last few years where some of the capital has been, that this is part of that.
I mean, I think it obviously makes economic sense if there's a way to do it.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
So I think we would be interested in exploring it if there's a way to do it. Corey,
I think we
quickly.
can.
So I think the salient point here is that this engine number 4 is in the capital improvements plan, the CIP. As is often the case with items in the CIP, we move things forward, we move things back, but it's in the CIP. And it can be a non-lapsing expenditure, meaning that you have 5 years. So we oftentimes, I mean, that's how the warrant article is written. You put it in front of town meeting and it would be one of, it wouldn't be a separate warrant article, it'd be one of those, shall we withdraw this amount with no money coming from taxation? And then you have up to 5 years to expend it. And so it's very straightforward because it's already in the CIP. It would just be a matter then that the CIP then maybe wouldn't stretch as far to get to some of the other items, and that's sort of an ongoing question. And what do you do about that? But it's very straightforward, like any other item in the CIP.
I think the one potential fly in the ointment, although maybe not, is that this would probably be bonded when the actual time came. $1 million purchase is most likely going to be bonded.
Right. Because 2 years ago it was in the CIP as $700,000, and I think in the capital financing policy that you all adopted, I mean, maybe was that 5-6 years ago, something that is in that category, you could go either way. And now that it's gone above the 1 million mark, although now with the 250,000, it gets sort of right underneath the cusp of where you were saying you would bond. But currently it's in, according to policy, in that range where you could go either way. And again, we are just really being hit by this inflation. And I'm sure it's not lost on anybody that all this money that we have, it's very frustrating that we've been so prudently saving is worth so much less than when we saved it because of an inflation. So I think that has to also be part of your thinking, what is the best use of the funds that we've put aside.
Good, thank you. Okay, so I think what you have is support for trying to figure out how to do this. Sounds like maybe it could be very straightforward.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
But I think it makes a lot of sense, so.
Okay, and then I would just say if anything comes up that we didn't talk about tonight as far as warrant article wise on anybody's radar here or finance committee or anywhere else, just reach out to me and, we'll make sure things are in the queue and probably at some point, well, more than probably we'll come back with, sort of final, I have not figured out exactly how that process will go. I'm sort of focused on the budget in a few weeks. But anyway, I'm sure we'll be back here to talk more.
Okay. Is that it for that? Are we done with the discussion?
That was quick.
Of anticipated, is that gonna be a 4-day meeting?
Which one?
The town
The
meeting?
town meeting?
A 4-day meeting? I hope not. Would you like this is gonna be my first town meeting, so tell me.
Pie.
Yeah, I'm just saying, that's gonna be
Talk to
a
Jared, see
very,
if he
very
gets an apple pie.
serious, there's gonna be many important
Yeah,
issues that I think people are gonna wanna
agreed.
discuss. Okay, so, let's move on to, budget presentation.
So a couple weeks ago, we had a conversation, and I provided a memo in some broad strokes about how we're approaching the budget and some of the challenges and some of the conversations as far as thinking about how we generate future revenue and things of that nature. What I wanted to do today is just make sure to check in a little bit about the format. And so some of the feedback that I've gotten over the last 7 or 8 months going around town and talking to people is people are very interested in accessible information that people maybe who have plugged in, but maybe also people who haven't plugged in as much can just kind of wrap their heads around highlights of important things and get kind of more involved in the process. And so I know that in the past, the budget presentations have been organized around these budget binders, which I believe the Finance Committee got and you all got and maybe were available to the public as well. And basically the format that we are sort of tracking towards right now is a little bit different, but I think it helps provide important information in a more accessible format, but also provides all the backup information as well. And so basically the format is in sort of a slide presentation, PowerPoint format. All of the sort of overarching organization-wide budget discussions, plus all of the department presentations, which will be not exactly the same, but pretty similar to last year. We're starting to kind of get our agenda ironed out and who's doing what on what night. And so there'll be slides that will walk us through basically everything. And they do have information on them, but they're not the degree of detail that was in the narrative of the budget binder. But then what we're also planning on providing is the Excel spreadsheet that's basically the master sheet that we're using to build the final budget. And that has all of the departments, all the expenses, revenues, some calculations, and that maybe if we are able to in the next couple of weeks, which I think we probably will, that we can set the sheet up in a way that locks certain formulas in place. So if people want to really look at the numbers and understand how changes in one area affect changes in another area, like they'd be able to do that. And that would be a full Excel spreadsheet. That would be a digital file. Those don't print very well. But there's going to be a little less printing, I think, this year is the sort of plan. All the slides, everything we're planning on sending out on February 21st. And so the presentations begin on the 27th, so that's a Tuesday. We have a holiday on Monday, though I have a funny feeling I'm going to be here, but we're planning on just getting everything out. We, not exactly a week, 7 days ahead of time, but 6 days ahead of time. So that'll go to the Finance Committee, that'll go to the Selectboard. That can go anywhere else if you'd like. And it's going to be a lot of slides. It's going to be 100 or 200 slides is my guess, with all the organization-wide stuff and all the different departments, but it's just going to be easy to follow in kind of consistent formatting. And then again, the backup Excel spreadsheets that have all of the accounts and historical data as well. So if you want to go further into the details, so you basically have both. So if you want to follow the highlights, it's a little easier to do that. But if you want to dive into all the details, you can also still do that.
I know this is not what you're addressing right now, but have you given thought to how we're gonna handle the town report with regard to the budget presentation?
A little bit. That's something we just started talking about. I'm not totally sure.
Okay.
But there's got to be some way to integrate this into that format, and I'm not
Yeah,
exactly sure.
that's what I was a little worried about when you said printing an Excel spreadsheet is.
It is. I mean, and we'll figure out a way to break some of those things up. But I should also mention what we're planning on doing with the budget presentations is, by the time we're getting into this, by the end of February, we may have our new website ready and live also. But either way, there'll be sort of a budget dashboard page on the website that will have links to all the stuff that we're talking about. And my goal is to break everything up in sort of manageable chunks. So it's not like opening, a 3-hour long video or a 300-page document, but that it's all, sort of itemized out. So if you want to look at the overall tax impact and forecast, if you want to look at the police presentation, if you want to look at the capital budget, right, each of those different things are going to be easy for people to find. And if they want to just watch the 15-minute presentation on one department, they can do that. But of course, if they want to watch the whole thing, that will be there as well. And certainly encourage people to, look at all the information, but we want to try and just make it a little bit easier for people to navigate all these kind of different pieces. So it's certainly a bit of a pilot in the sense that this is our first year doing this together, and very much open to feedback about how this looks and whether what we provide in a few weeks works or doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, maybe we make some modifications for the town report or for town meeting. But also if it does work, again, a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from folks is that they kind of look at the doc, they don't really know what to do with it. And they would, prefer something that narrows down, but I definitely do not want to skip on the detail for folks that want to look at all of the detail. So the goal is to have both.
Good. Questions on that?
Thank you. But it'll be certainly a little different.
I think our use of the budget binder has changed over the years dramatically. And I think you're correct that we have cherry picked the highlights out of that rather than going through it line item by line item, paragraph by paragraph. And I think that's worked well. So it's just another way of increasing that progress, I think. So I think we look forward to it. We look forward to those. You said 30 slides, right?
30 slides?
Oh, 10.
He
Okay.
said 1 to 200.
Oh, did he say 300 slides?
And
I missed that.
our
I missed
computers
that.
have the capacity to do this?
Yes, it's amazing what we can do.
I think
It's
we
a
can do
Dropbox.
it.
Oh, my
And I will, yeah.
But we look forward to the 21st. at it.
Yes,
Have
yes,
at it.
me too.
Any other comments on that? No. Banner request.
I move that we accept, I'm trying to remember what it was, the banner request from Dartmouth College for Black Legacy Month.
I'll second.
And we have room. That's about we're all set there. We have all been taken care of. Any questions about it? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? It passes. We have a wonderful donation that we need to accept from Eric and Susan Shirley to the Etna Library for $125, and we appreciate their donation.
Yeah, I move, do you need a motion or do you just
I need a
say-
motion.
I move we accept the donation from the Shirley family to the Etna Library. Thank you.
Second.
Is further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you again. Minutes of January 23.
Is that the one? Is that the one we tabled? No.
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 That's
We're
back
back
in
in, we're back in order.
Who did that?
Yeah, go back on.
But where is it?
I only had one, and you don't need to really change it, but we had a public hearing and there was no public comment, no comment. The word was just written none. But it maybe you should say there was no public comment.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what none refers to.
And there's a minor typo on item 3.
Oh.
The planning and zoning department has applied for, and it's just, the words are inversed or. It says
That's an
and
item
for.
3.
Yeah,
Is that okay?
item 3, the first sentence after the bold title of the thing. It's just a, I mean, you can figure it out, it's not a.
Not Ann
I don't know, you haven't read it, no.
This is, I did wanna say that I've noticed that the minutes say a lot more than they have in a while. I mean, like,
Oh, okay,
which is good,
okay,
cause I'm reminded of what actually happened versus,
I see.
like, they're less vague, thank you.
Well, we can do that, yeah, sure.
I guess it's just for discussion, maybe we have to leave it the way it is, but on
It's not
page
me.
4 of
I
9,
can take no credit.
we talked, when we started the discussion about the target rate, it starts out by saying Chair Christie moved. And then there was no second, and we also agreed that there was no motion needed.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know whether it's worth saying that Chair Christie proposed rather than moved. And then
Looks like it died.
if we do that, then later on page 5 of 9, halfway down the page, you can strike the last, keep the words, there was a consensus among all board members that a 67% blended rate is a good target for 24, and then strike the next, though Chair Christie motion was not seconded nor voted on.
Can you send me those?
Yeah, I will.
Okay, thanks. I didn't catch that.
So I move those changes.
I don't think you really, did you really move it? I don't think you did.
I don't even know.
I think you just said it was,
I can't remember, but it turns out a motion was not appropriate, and we didn't do anything with it anyway.
it's fun not to second things too, though.
Huh?
And we always second things. It's fun to, like, to have
Yeah,
a motion
there we go.
gonna die.
Okay, any other corrections, changes, additions? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Administrative report.
So I just got 2 updates. The first is that we are excited to have appointed a new human resources director who is here tonight. So Katie Williams is starting as our HR director.
Welcome, thank you.
She's starting on Monday, so we're super excited. And we just posted an announcement on our website, so that's got a little bit more information about the process that we went through, the number of applications we received, a little bit about Katie's background, who's got HR experience in the private sector, nonprofit, and public sector as well. And yeah, I don't know if you want to come up and introduce yourself at all.
Come on,
I
Katie.
don't know if I mentioned that ahead of time, but.
You did. I'll stand here.
No, you have to sit,
Katie,
Katie,
come to the mic and introduce
Jay, what-
You're
yourself.
gonna be on TV.
you're on TV, there's about 1 million people watching, so don't be nervous.
Million views.
No pressure.
Like Alex said, I'm Katie Williams. I have experience in the public, private, and nonprofit. I'm also a current select board member for the town of Haverhill. I'm just finishing up my first term, learning lots. I'm really excited to join the team here, and I look forward to starting on Monday. Do you guys have any questions for me while I'm up here?
Welcome, you're a good soul to sit through. This is a particularly long meeting. We
Yes,
still
yes.
have more to go, so welcome. It's not usually this.
We have really long meetings too, so it's okay. Thank you.
Just so you know, Alex forwarded your resumes and your response to some of the unusual questions that get asked of some of our people. I enjoyed your answers.
Oh, thank you.
That's great.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So yeah, so congratulations, Katie. We're very excited, and you know, we're starting to kind of get moving here with Ellen in the finance director position, and Katie now starting in HR. It just feels like, you know, the team is starting to come together a little bit here. So just very excited about all of that. The only other update I have on the administrative side is, you know, the January Hanover happenings is out. And there's a few different updates which you all are familiar with because of course you're in the select board meetings. But the 2 other updates that I just want to draw attention to is our employee spotlight and community spotlight. So the community spotlight was Kyle Mullins, who is a student at Dartmouth College, class of 23. I met Kyle a few weeks ago doing a talk at the Rockefeller Center. Right? Not
Yes,
Institute.
yes.
Yeah, Center. The Rockefeller Center. And then I did a recording for their podcast. And then as we finished, I said, hey, you got 20 more minutes? Want to do one for us? And so we talked a little bit about his time here, his time working at Still North during COVID, which was just some interesting reflections just about how much she felt like part of the community here, even though things were just all very weird, and just some other kind of interesting updates and reflections. So that was kind of cool. And then another one, which I've gotten some really nice feedback about, is an employee spotlight that I wanted to introduce Ellen to the community, but also introduce our finance staff, who, especially for the last 3 or 4 months, I mean, they have been, really kind of, there's been a lot on their shoulders. And so we sat down and had a conversation, myself, Ellen, Karen, and Tammy, our 2 finance staff, and had a conversation. We talked a little bit about what the finance department does, some of the challenges that we've had, some of the goals, and then I think veered into some, I was trying to veer into some more getting people to share and talk a little more, and we got some interesting conversation about socks and dogs and geodesic domes and cats, and dogs and cats working together, which is a little frightening, because if that's the case, then I think we're all doomed. But I thought that was just a nice conversation, and I was just happy to get to introduce Ellen to the community, but also to just spotlight Karen and Tammy, who have just put in so much work over the last few months, and I think are just as excited as I am that Ellen's here too. So if you're curious and learning a little bit more about some of the folks who work for the town or some of our community members, check out the podcast. It's wherever you listen, Hanover Happenings, and that is my updates.
I'll comment that they both were excellent.
Oh, good.
Good formative, good humor.
Good.
And I think it's good for the community to listen to them. You don't look at them, you listen to them.
Right, that's true. Although I think we're going to do one where we're going to do a video. Well, maybe I'll save it as a surprise.
Yeah, see,
okay.
just hold that. Don't,
Okay.
don't give all your information out the same night. Just
it's true.
Keep us teased a little bit. So.
I will hold that one for now.
Okay. Select board reports.
Nothing to report.
Nothing.
Nothing to report.
2 quick things. Hanover Bike Walk met this afternoon at 4. I wasn't able to attend, but heard it over the grapevine that the bike walk master plan is nearing completion, and you should expect to receive it soon. It's a fairly lengthy document, and so there's been some push to summarize the 180 pages to like 15. So that's the work that's happening on that, and then just the Hanover Sustainability Master Planning Committee will have its next meeting on Tuesday, Valentine's Day, at 5 o'clock here in the room. People are welcome. We'll be working on strategies and goals that have to do with, I can't remember, but it's posted.
Okay. Alex, I do have one question. Rob created a memo about a possible real estate purchase. Is that on tonight's agenda? Do we need to do that tonight?
No, we do not. And we can talk about it in non-public, but there's no action for it tonight.
And we're on for a non-public tonight?
Yep, and you should have your items there.
Okay. So any other business? No other business? Board, to bring before the meeting? There has been a request for a non-public session to discuss items pursuant to RSA 91A, 3A, B, C, D, and
L.
It's really hard to tell what that is.
Joanna?
Yes.
Nancy Carter, yes.
Peter Christie, yes.
Arthur Strassies, yes.
Bill Garrity, yes.
We are in non-public session. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a marathon one.